Hi, my name is Karolina Sieler and I am a former law lecturer here in London, as well as the founder of a platform called firstclassllb.com. This platform, if you want to check it out, helps law students just like you to get first in both their essays and their exams in law. Today I want to talk to you about how you can memorize law cases before exams in order to get a first in your exam. Now, I have to mention this at the very beginning. Obviously, just memorizing the cases and being able to recall them is not something that will definitely get you a first, but it is the first step towards getting a first. So you definitely need to cover this ground, cover the basics in order to be able to practice other techniques for exam revisions. If you want to find out the whole system of how to write first class law exam answers, you can check out my course, which is called First Class Law Exam Revision Course, on my website, and I'll provide a link to it down below. And there I will discuss a little bit more about memorizing cases, but also just provide you with an entire system that you can follow before every single exam in order to get a first. But let's crack on with what I wanted to talk to you about today, which is memorizing law cases before exams. There are 3 specific techniques that I want to share with you today. The first one is called covering, the second one is called storytelling, and the third one is called the writing technique. So let's start with the covering technique. For this technique, you have to format your revision note in the form of a table with 2 columns. So on the left side, in the left column, you're going to put the names of the parties of the cases. And in the right side, in the right column, you're going to put the explanations. So this could be a point of law or an important judgment in the case, or it could be the facts of the case and the decision, depending on kind of which one is more relevant for your revision. Now, what I want you to do once you have written those down is to use either a piece of paper, a sheet of paper, or your hand to cover up the right side, which contains the explanations of the cases, and then just try to recall by looking at the name of the case on the left side what this case is about. And usually it works better if you just say it out loud, so that you kind of help yourself to memorize it even better by hearing it again. And so you kind of repeat this step with every case and cover and uncover every single case. And you kind of keep doing that until you're actually able to say out loud or just recall in your memory every single explanation for every single case. Now, if you find that you will have a lot of cases where you've already memorized and there's no point recalling them again, the explanations of those cases, but there are others that you haven't memorized well just yet, what you could do instead is just, instead of just recalling all of the cases again every time you try to attempt your recall, you could just put a star next to the cases that you have already memorized, or somehow mark them otherwise, so that you know you don't have to do it anymore. And then just work with these cases that specifically you need more revising for because you haven't memorized the facts of the case or the point of law just yet. So that's the first technique, called covering. The second technique is called storytelling. This is a slightly more clever technique in a way which kind of involves a little bit of investment in time at the beginning. But once you invest this time, you are able to recall the cases very, very easily. And especially it works with recalling a list of the cases. So very often what happens for students during exams is they have a revision note which, let's say, contains 10 different cases, and they forget the names of some of the cases. They might remember the facts of the case, the point of law, or the judgment in that case, but they will forget the names of the cases. So what you can do at the beginning of your exam is just, when you start writing your answer for that specific question that you revised for, you can just quickly note down all the names of the cases in the order that you've learned it, so that later on it kind of will help you to recall quicker which case you need to use. Now, the way that you use this technique of storytelling is you try to create a story with the cases that are on your list. So let's say the first case on your list is the case of Hart against Medley. The second case is the case of Daniels against Stevenson. What you need to do is you need to try to create in your head a little story about Mr. Hart, Medley, Mr. Daniels, Mr. Stevenson, and just try to say the story to yourself again and again. So an example, Hart against Medley. Hart, even though it's spelled H-A-R-T, instead of heart as the organ, you could associate it with the heart, the organ. So you could say, my little heart was full of love, but for Medley, you could use it kept meddling in someone else's affairs, or something like this. I know this is a slightly vague example, but it just shows you how you can play with the words and associate them with something else. So when I recall Hart and I recall Medley, meddling, I will remember that the first name in the case was Hart, H-A-R-T, and then the second one was Medley. And so the reason why this technique works is because rather than just being a pure memorization of very dry names which kind of have no emotional attachment to them, you create this specific emotional attachment by creating a little story, and you also help yourself to imagine that story. So you can imagine a little heart that starts meddling in other people's affairs, and then something else happens. And because you've created this story, it means something to you emotionally at some level, and you also are imagining it at the same time as recalling it, you are very quickly able to recall the lists of the cases. Now, this technique, of course, is not very good for remembering the facts of the case or the point of law in it or the judgment, but you can use the other two techniques for that. And this technique specifically will help you to memorize the list of the names of the cases that you need to be revising for your question. So the third technique is called the writing technique. This technique is kind of similar to the covering technique, but it engages a slightly different skill, a slightly different way of recalling the cases. So if you're quite good at, and if you kind of generally prefer to say things out loud when you recall and try to memorize the cases, then perhaps the covering technique will be better for you. But if you prefer to write things down, and it's also something that you'll be doing during an exam, so it's well worth doing it at some point when you're revising for the exam, you should use the writing technique. And here again, just like with the covering technique, you're going to be using a table with two columns, whereby on the left side you've got the names of the cases, and on the right side you've got all the explanations, such as the points of law, the judgments, the facts and the decisions in the case. What you do is you create one template which has the explanations in, so the right column is in there, and then you create another template on your laptop and just print it out, in which the right side, the right column is empty. So you would print out several of those sheets, and then when you start revising, once you're kind of comfortable with, okay, I've kind of tried memorizing the cases, you take out the sheet which has the blank pattern on the right side, and you just try to write down the missing elements, the missing explanations. And the reason why you will need to, of course, print off several of those sheets of paper is because you will likely recall some cases and not others. So you will have to repeat this process several times before the cases are actually learned and stuck in your head, and you've learned them by heart. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you want to learn more about how to get a first in your exams, then I would highly recommend that you check out my first class law exam revision course that I'll provide a link to down below, which a lot of students have found very, very helpful in kind of understanding what is it that they have to do, and understanding that they don't really need to do every single thing that the lecturer tells them to do in terms of, oh, you have to revise every single thing, you have to revise every topic, your answer just has to be perfect in order to get a first. That's honestly not true. And if you study from my course, you'll understand that there's a specific system that you have to follow. And as long as you follow that system, and it's actually quite simple, you are more or less guaranteed to get a first or close to a first. So that's it from me for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and so that I know I should create more of those. And also subscribe to my channel for more similar videos in the future.